Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, November 7th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 5 days. The game against Michigan, Tony, under 20 days away, 19 days till the Michigan game. And the last time we recorded a show, it was the post-game show. We did it inside the stadium at Ryan Field. And I walked out of that stadium thinking, boy, I don't think Ohio State's going to win the national championship this year. They just don't. They're missing some stuff. It doesn't feel like they've kind of come together in the way that you needed to. And then here we are, one day later, and I feel like Ohio State's national championship hopes are more alive than they ever have been after a crazy Saturday of football.
Well, because they're alive and others aren't, and that's what happens. It's especially on the road in conference play. You don't have to win pretty. There's no bonus points for that. If you win the ugliest game you can on the road, it's still a win, and that's the whole survive and advance thing. And that's what you have to do. These random conference games that show up for everybody, and it's the ones that the fans hate. But at the end of the season, you've kind of forgotten about, but the coaches and the players haven't, because they draw on this, and they fought through adversity. And all anybody else is looking for is the 40-point win that you should have gotten because you were favored by 38.
Yeah, and Ohio State had the wins that they could sort of point to as, here's the reason why it wasn't a 35 or 38-point win. And yes, having been there, yes, I can assure you that was a very legitimate reason for it not to have been that kind of day. But it was kind of a crazy day all around college football. You'll get these days sometimes where it looks like, there's a couple big games, but, Ohio State at Northwestern, Michigan at Rutgers. Like, how interesting are those games going to be? Well, those were both interesting games into the second half. Rutgers had a halftime lead over Michigan, and then Michigan pulled away because eventually the talent does generally win out in those kind of games. Ohio State did eventually pull away, in as much as there was no way Northwestern was going to score more than 2 touchdowns in the second half, or if they played a third half or a fourth half. So, it was both were ended up as comfortable wins, not beautiful, but comfortable. But there were teams that did not, in fact, escape. Let's start with the one that I think maybe is not the biggest game of the weekend, but the one that is going to have the most significant bearing on Ohio State, and that's Notre Dame and Clemson.
Yeah, that's effectively a win for Ohio State right there, because they have the win over Notre Dame. Clemson now is essentially out of the picture, but as long as they continue to win, that's going to be a quality win for Notre Dame. It's a quality win for Ohio State. Notre Dame will show up in the rankings this week. Tom, maybe 25th, something like that. But they're gonna continue to rise up, and that's going to be something that Ohio State will have that a Michigan won't. Or so for a while, it will be a nice little boost for them, and maybe it helps them buoy this win over Northwestern.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple ways that helps them, that Notre Dame win. One is, like you said, Notre Dame is coming into the rankings. I'm going to guess about 19th. 25th would be surprising if it was that low. I'm going to guess about 18th or 19th. So then you have a comfortable ranked win where even if Notre Dame loses to USC later in the season, it's still a ranked win at the end of the year. And also, you have a head-to-head, you have a direct comparison where one team beat Notre Dame by 11 points, the other one lost to Notre Dame. That helps if Ohio State hypothetical Ohio State loses to Michigan, and then the battle for the 4th spot is 11-1 Ohio State and a 12-1 ACC champion Clemson. Well, Ohio State has a head-to-head win over Notre Dame. Clemson has a head-to-head loss to Notre Dame. So that is the kind of thing that's going to come into that conversation, I think, a little bit potentially in that scenario. And it's one more team that's off. Kind of the Clemson's. I don't know that Clemson's out, but Clemson's resume is really not very good. So now they're definitely dropping a few spots.
Yeah, you can set them aside for now. We'll table Clemson for now. I do, and we'll talk about this. We may have to talk about this later on. Moving forward, if Ohio State does lose to Michigan and they're compared for that 4th spot with Clemson, who does the committee want to see in there? A team like Ohio State that has the offense that can do something and has a good defense, or Clemson who can show up and not have any offense and give up 35 points. Well, the defense didn't give up all of those points to Notre Dame. Yes. I think they gave up, 21 points to them maybe. But still, that lack of offense from Clemson might be the thing that keeps them out when it comes to a 4 or 5 discussion.
Well, and the committee's already told you they think Ohio State's better than Clemson, and you know that because they had Ohio State ranked a couple spots ahead of Clemson, and Ohio State's resume didn't get significantly better, but Clemson's resume got worse on Saturday, and I don't know that there's that many opportunities for Clemson to really improve their resume moving forward. Maybe they get North Carolina in the ACC championship game, but that's an okay win, but that's not a signature win. And then Ohio State probably at that point has a better win than maybe two better wins than North Carolina, because they got Penn State, you got Notre Dame. So yeah, that felt like a very, very significant game for Ohio State's playoff chances. Another one that felt significant that you really didn't need to hedge at all was number 3 Georgia against number 1 Tennessee. Tony, I don't think Georgia's going to be number 3 when the new rankings come out.
No, I'm thinking at least number 2, Tom. Yeah, they'll jump Ohio State. And we talked about that when the rankings came out. It's like, well, don't get lost on Georgia being 3, because they will jump Ohio State with a win over Tennessee, and they should. You just beat the number 1 team in the nation. You could say maybe Ohio State's win was better this week, yes. But Northwestern was not ranked number 1. Tennessee was, so boom, they jump, and then they're there until the end of the year, until they play in the playoffs. I mean, maybe we'll see what happens with Alabama in the SEC championship game, maybe, or LSU,
or Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it feels like Georgia is very, very likely to be the number 1 seed. Which, if Georgia's the number 1 seed, the only way Ohio State would play in the Peach Bowl would be if Ohio State was the 4 seed. So if Ohio State loses to Michigan, potentially you could see Ohio State in the Peach Bowl. Otherwise, if they win out, they are almost a lock to go to the Fiesta Bowl at this point, I would say. So plan your travel accordingly. Don't book anything yet. Please don't book anything yet, but plan your travel accordingly. That Georgia win was very impressive. I tweeted something on Saturday night about the fact that I have walked out of multiple stadiums this year thinking Ohio State is not going to win the national championship, and then you watch the rest of the top 5 and it's like, well, it's like the gif of the girl eating kimchi or kombucha or something like that, where it's just like, oh, yuck, and it's like, well, what if? And it's like, no, you look at everyone, and I think Ohio State fans are well versed in Ohio State's flaws this year. Michigan was trailing Rutgers at halftime. That is not a flawless team. Tennessee just got firebombed and Tennessee's pass defense has been an issue all year. Alabama just lost their second game of the year. Clemson just lost the game. TCU's unbeaten, but TCU's not. TCU is not a team that you look at and go, this is 1995 Nebraska all over again, or 2019 LSU. They're fine, but they have issues. And Georgia. The response to that was a bunch of, oh, apparently you didn't see Georgia play today. It's like, okay, yes, congratulations to Georgia for playing a good game. Guess what? Georgia did all their stuff on offense by throwing the ball deep against Tennessee, because Tennessee's secondary has been terrible this year. That has been how you beat Tennessee. We've talked about that in terms of the Michigan matchup with Tennessee would Michigan be a bad matchup for Tennessee, or would Tennessee be a bad matchup for Michigan? Because that's not what Michigan really does. Well, guess you can throw the ball down the field when the wind's not blowing 50 miles an hour. Well, surprise, friends, it's Ohio State. So, yeah, I don't know that Ohio State would have Georgia's pass defense is good, but I don't know that Georgia is quite as invincible as they looked on Saturday.
I'm guessing Missouri doesn't think Georgia is invincible when Missouri had them up against the ropes late in that game. Just another example of conference road games being, you think they're predictable, and many times they are, but every year there's 1 or 2 of those games where you have to dig deep and you come away with a win, and then you move on. And depending on when that win happens, people tend to forget about it. But when you're looking at all of these weak spots nationally with every single team, and everybody's like, see what Georgia did to Tennessee? They beat them by 2 touchdowns. Should have beaten them by more. Could have beaten them by more. But then it's like, but did you also see that Missouri game a month ago where they didn't look all that great? And you could do the same thing with Tennessee. Did you watch that Pitt game? So there are examples for every team, and that's why you can't. Talking to the Buckeye fans right now, like, just don't throw the Buckeyes out right now, because there are no perfect teams, and now there are some perfect records. Ohio State happens to have one of those, and as long as you can get in, every single one of these teams has flaws. Some flaws may be more glaring than others, but it may come down to matchups. Which team gets matched up? Do those flaws fit what the other strengths are for the other team? But there are no A1A, above everybody else, because all of these teams have shown that they're not it. They're not that. This isn't an all-time great season of great teams because Missouri's not that good, and they had Georgia almost dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that Georgia. I mean, that was a Georgia win, but that was a Georgia escapes in a way that Ohio State at Northwestern, and Missouri's a better team than Northwestern, but not that much better. And that was a Georgia escapes where they were losing very, very late in the game. Ohio State didn't escape Northwestern. Ohio State played with its food for a while, and the weather played a significant factor and held the score down. But Ohio State, at no point in the fourth quarter did you think Ohio State is in any real danger here. So Georgia was very much in danger, and that was a while ago, and Georgia's a better team now. But to your point about matchups, think back to last year, the Ohio State game, Ohio State, Michigan State, that round robin there. Michigan State beats Michigan, but Michigan State's weakness was pass defense, and Michigan and Ohio. So guess what Ohio State did? 49-0 at halftime, 56-7 final, and then Ohio State has a transitive win over Michigan by 45 points, and guess what happens the next week in Ann Arbor? Well, it turns out it's a different game and a different team and different weather conditions and all that kind of stuff. So, yes, you can never read too much into that stuff, but yes, this does feel like a matchups will really matter kind of season. One team that I think. Can we drive a stake through the heart of Alabama? Is Alabama really dead, or can Nick Saban always will the playoff committee always invite Nick Saban into their house if Alabama, I mean, they have to win the SEC now, so you're not getting in as a 10-2 non-division champion. So there's a bunch of tiebreakers to figure out with how things sort out with LSU and Ole Miss and Alabama on the west side of that conference, but if Alabama somehow gets in and then beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, please convince me that Alabama is not, in fact, going to get into the college football playoff field.
I can't because I've seen the committee talk too often. It would require many other things to happen where you're comparing a 2-loss Alabama team to a 1-loss USC, Pac-12 champ, or a Clemson, 1-loss Clemson ACC champ, and then you allow the committee to compare Alabama to other teams. If you let Alabama into the picture, this committee could find ways. And the key is just keep them out. But what happens then? So Alabama beats Georgia, and Tennessee has beaten Alabama, and you have all of this rigmarole. And well, we got to put 2 in somehow. Which 2 do we put in? And They don't need to put in a 2-loss team at this point. Save that for the expansion. We talked about this after the game on Saturday, where I think there's a way. I think there's a chance that this happens, that a 2-loss SEC champ gets in, because LSU is going to move up in the rankings, and they could be that team. So I know you are adamant that it shouldn't happen. We're both adamant that it shouldn't happen. I'm not convinced that it won't.
I'm not at all convinced that it won't. I think this is a year where you've had, the Clemson loss on Saturday opens up a whole bunch of different possibilities. Some of them are good for Ohio State, including like they get in with a loss to Michigan. Some of them are, I think that opens up also the possibilities that Ohio State fans probably don't want to necessarily see, which is, there's a way you have 3 SEC teams in, but it's also, this opens up the possibility that if TCU loses, so you have no undefeated conference champions outside of the Big Ten and the SEC, it feels significantly more likely now that you would see 2 SEC teams, 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff, because, and I think that's the most likely scenario for that to happen is for Michigan to beat Ohio State and Columbus, because Ohio State has some carrying wins that they can point to where they beat Notre Dame, they beat Penn State, and they will have beaten Maryland on the road, and so that's at least 2 ranked wins. Michigan's resume this year is, if Michigan loses to Ohio State, their resume is Penn State. I mean, they beat Penn State real thoroughly, but other than that, I mean, it's okay. But I think Ohio State would have a stronger case to get in as a 11-1 non-conference champion team. But it does seem like the number of potential pathways, if you're going to draw out the here's the 74 different ways this could play out, that the number of ways it could play out is a lot smaller, and all of the two Big Ten, two SEC team pathways are still there.
And I think they're getting wider. And you know, I'm total agreement with the Michigan Ohio State thing, because you know, Ohio State with a win over Michigan, then Michigan has really nothing. Michigan with that win over Ohio State would still have the win over Notre Dame. You still have the Penn State. You still have the fact that, well, their only loss is to number 2 Michigan, and so that the committee will take that into account. And then again, once you're comparing teams head to head, once you're comparing, I think they tend to do it in like groups of 3, but if you're comparing Ohio State, a 11-1 Ohio State versus a 12-1 Clemson versus a 12-1 TCU, I think the committee's like, well, eventually TCU's going to run into somebody that they can't come back from. You know, they'll get down 2 touchdowns to everybody they played, and then they win by 10 or whatever. And if you know that's going to happen, do you try to keep that from happening in the playoffs? And you know, there'll be some manufacturing going on, but yeah, I think that the 2 SEC teams, 2 Big Ten teams, we talked about that probably a month ago. Just keep an eye on it, and you know, this is how things are breaking right now.
Yeah, it certainly does seem like that's one of the possible scenarios that we could see playing out. But there will be plenty of time to talk about all of this stuff. We'll be doing our live show Tuesday evening as we watch the playoff rankings reveal. That'll be Tuesday evening at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Kevin Noon, Tony, and I will all be there going through, and now we have another week, and we'll see. You know, I'm super interested to see how far does Tennessee fall. You know, does Tennessee fall to 3? Does Tennessee fall to 7? I think it's probably not going to be 3, but if it's 3, that's going to tell you a lot about what the committee thinks about you know, all that. I don't think it's going to be 3.
Are they ahead of TCU?
Are they ahead of TCU is a great question, because Alabama was ahead of TCU last week. I bet they are ahead of TCU because, well, they've got a better win, Tony, even though the Alabama win is no longer quite as shiny because LSU took care of Alabama on Saturday night. They haven't even talked about that, but
Can you really hold that against LSU? Or Alabama, they lost to the number 10 team in the nation, who is now like the number 8 or 7 team in the nation. So it's basically almost a win.
It's almost, so many quality losses. Yes, so we'll have plenty of time to talk about all of that. Maybe have a little sarcasm in that show. Who's to say? Possible. So that's Tuesday night, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. We also will have a basketball game. There's a basketball game Monday night. Tony will be covering that one. Tony or Kevin, maybe both. I don't know.
I'll be there.
Okay, Tony will be there. There we go. So the Buckeyes playing their first home basketball game of the season, real basketball game, not exhibition game. That at coverage at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And I'm guessing there will be some football to talk about this week as well on the Ohio State side of things as they head into their penultimate home game of the season facing Indiana on Saturday. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.